Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're your guides, and our mission, really, is to cut through all the noise.
Yeah, take a really close look at source material.
Exactly. And pull out the most important, maybe surprising, definitely insightful nuggets of knowledge just for you.
Think of it like getting straight to the core understanding, those aha moments.
Right, without you having to wade through everything yourself.
Saves you the trouble.
So today we are plunging into, well, a really pivotal moment in history. A game-changing battle that fundamentally reshaped a long struggle for independence.
And we should probably mention the source we're focusing on for this one.
Yes, absolutely. For this deep dive, our material comes specifically from an article by Simon Weldemichael. It's titled, Fenkil Operation Game Changer in the Independence Struggle.
Right. And understanding specific turning points like the ones Simon Weldemichael really dissects in this article, it's just crucial. These aren't, just isolated military events.
No, not at all.
There are moments where history can suddenly pivot. You see these cascading effects that change political power, even national identities sometimes.
A single effort can really shift the balance.
In really profound ways, yeah.
Absolutely. So our mission today, and we're guiding this entirely by Simon Weldemichael's account in this article, is to unpack exactly what the Fenkil Operation was.
Delve into why he argues it was such a game changer, militarily, politically.
And explore the full weight of its impact, all based on the detailed account he provides. So get ready for some, well, pretty astonishing facts and a deep look at the sheer scale, the strategic thinking behind it.
It's quite the story.
Okay, let's unpack this then.
Yeah.
We need to set the scene for the Fenkil Operation. Simon Weldemichael marks this as a really decisive turning point.
Mm-hmm.
And according to his article, this wasn't some drawn-out campaign. It was concentrated. High stakes, fought over just 3 days.
3 days, February 8th to February 10th, 1990. That's a very short time frame for something so significant.
It really is. And the objective, which is central to Weldemichael's argument for why it's so important, was liberation of the port city of Massawa.
Right. Now, maybe for listeners less familiar with the specifics here, it's worth asking, as the article prompts us to, why Massawa? Why was this particular city, this port, so incredibly critical?
Good question. And Simon Weldemichael's article gives a very clear answer. He describes Massawa as the main artery.
The main artery.
For transporting logistics, armament, everything, for the Ethiopian army stationed in Eritrea.
Okay, so picture this. An army fighting far from its base.
Right.
Everything it needs, food, fuel, ammo, reinforcements, heavy weapons, has to come from somewhere.
And for the Ethiopian forces, especially those in key places like Asmara, the capital, Massawa was that vital link, primarily to the Red Sea.
So cutting that lifeline.
It would be catastrophic for them, just devastating.
And the context Weldemichael provides is also really important here. This operation didn't happen early on.
No, this was late in the game.
Very late. It occurred late in Eritrea's long, and as the article puts it, bitter struggle for independence. By 1990, the fight had been going on for decades.
Decades. So capturing Massawa at this stage wasn't just about gaining territory.
No, it was a strategic blow right into the Ethiopian military's operational capacity at a time when they were already stretched thin.
And you can see how significant it remains today. Simon Weldemichael actually notes in the article that Eritreans were preparing to celebrate the 34th anniversary of this event.
34 years later.
Yeah, which really highlights how deeply Fenkil Operation is etched into their national consciousness. It's not just some date in a history book.
No, it's clearly a moment of national pride, strategic reflection, still remembered, still honored.
Okay, now let's get into the immediate military outcomes. And these are detailed in Simon Weldemichael's article. The sheer scale of the victory he describes is, well, it's kind of hard to fully grasp without looking at the specific numbers he gives.
The statistics he presents are, they're pretty remarkable. And if they're accurate, they really speak volumes about the operation's efficiency and the scale of the defeat for the Ethiopian forces.
So what does he say?
Weldemichael states that in this 3-day battle, more than 40,000 Ethiopian soldiers were either killed, captured, or wounded.
40,000.
Yeah.
Killed, captured, or wounded. In 72 hours.
72 hours.
That's an immense number. A staggering loss of personnel for the Ethiopians in just one single concentrated action.
Huge human toll. And it wasn't just manpower, though.
Right, the material losses, too.
Exactly. The article details those as well, and it paints this picture of a force that wasn't just, beaten back, but systematically dismantled, stripped of its heavy gear.
So what kind of gear are we talking about?
Weldemichael reports 80 tanks were captured intact by the Eritrean forces.
Intact, meaning they could potentially be used again.
Potentially, yes. And on top of that, 30 more tanks were destroyed, burned out.
So it's 110 tanks gone from the Ethiopian side in 3 days.
110. And furthermore, the Ethiopian naval force that was present in the Massawa area was, according to the source, annihilated.
Annihilated. That's a strong word. It suggests just complete destruction of their naval capacity there.
Utterly destroyed, leaving the Red Sea approaches wide open in that critical port.
So Simon Weldemichael's analysis in the article is pretty clear about the immediate impact of all this.
Oh, absolutely unambiguous. He states, these losses created fundamental military changes in the balance of power.
In favor of the Eritrean freedom fighters.
Right. And this wasn't some gradual shift. It was sudden, dramatic, a rebalancing act, almost overnight.
He uses a metaphor to describe the effect on the Ethiopian army, which, as he reminds us, was considered the largest in Africa at the time.
Yeah, that's a really vivid one. Weldemichael writes that the operation reduced the Ethiopian army into a toothless tiger.
A toothless tiger. Wow. That image is incredibly powerful, isn't it?
It really is. It implies that, okay, despite its size, its appearance of strength, maybe its reputation, the actual ability to strike, to project force effectively, that was fundamentally removed.
So, still a large entity on paper, maybe still looked impressive.
But its critical teeth, its offensive and logistical capabilities were gone. It just couldn't bite anymore, in his view.
And Weldemichael's analysis suggests this wasn't just about equipment and numbers lost. There was a profound psychological impact, too.
Definitely. He notes that the Ethiopian military establishment, and remember, they'd received significant help from both the West and the East at different times.
So they had substantial external support over the years.
Right. Despite all that, Weldemichael says they lost the spirit to fight after Fenkil.
Losing the spirit to fight. I mean, that goes way deeper than just a military defeat. That's psychological.
Exactly. It's a deep wound. Their article describes their later attempts to try and reclaim Massawa as having failed miserably.
Which just illustrates how deep that disorganization, that disillusionment must have run after this, well, stunning defeat.
It seems it wasn't just that they couldn't fight effectively anymore. They seem to have lost the actual will to even try in a coordinated way.
And Weldemichael adds another layer to this, right?
Yeah.
About the captured officers.
Yes, he reinforces the scale of the collapse by mentioning the capture of over 300 military officers of various ranks.
300 officers.
Yeah.
Including several brigadier generals.
Yes. Capturing that many high-ranking officers in just one battle really underscores the complete disruption, the breakdown of the Ethiopian command structure, according to his account.
Okay, let's drill down a bit into the specifics of the battle itself. The moments, the tactics, as Simon Weldemichael describes them in the article.
Right. He paints this picture of the final stages. The remaining pockets of Ethiopian resistance were kind of cornered, concentrated in this small, critical area called Twelep.
Twala, and that was connected to the mainland how?
There's essentially a peninsula, or maybe a small area connected by this narrow passage, the Sigalet Causeway. And a really crucial and frankly disturbing detail highlighted in the source is that this besieged army, under Brigadier General Tasom Tasima specifically, they held the civilian population of Massawa hostage inside this pocket.
That's horrific, putting civilians right in the middle of it all.
A terrible situation. So according to the article, the Eritrean forces, the EPLF, how did they react? Well, first, they tried to resolve it without more bloodshed.
They called for the civilians to be released.
Yes, called for their release and even offered amnesty to the surrounded Ethiopian troops, a chance to surrender safely.
Agreed.
But Weldemichael states these calls fell on deaf ears. The Ethiopian command in Twala just refused to release the hostages, refused to surrender.
So the EPLF was faced with this stalemate, civilians still in danger. What did they do next?
They took decisive action. And the source notes something pretty remarkable here. They declared a unilateral ceasefire for 12 hours.
Unilateral. So not agreed upon by both sides, just the EPLF pausing things.
Exactly, initiated solely by the EPLF. Now, the article doesn't explicitly state why, but you could interpret it maybe as a final humanitarian gesture, a last chance for surrender, or perhaps just tactical preparation time.
Okay, so after this 12-hour pause,
Their forces launched the final assault.
And Simon Weldemichael gives details on this final push.
He does. EPLF tanks and infantry raided Toilet and the port area. And he emphasizes that their primary objective in this final phase, according to the article, was liberating the people held hostage.
So prioritizing the safety of the civilians.
That's what the account suggests, yes, that they were there to free.
Now, from a military perspective, Weldemichael highlights something about the tactics used here, didn't he? Something novel.
Yes, he really emphasizes the tactical novelty and the complexity of this whole operation for the EPLF. He describes Fenkil as an amphibious operation.
Amphibious. Okay, so involving sea forces as well as land.
Exactly. The first of its kind in the history of their struggle, he says. It wasn't just ground troops moving along roads.
Right, not a standard ground assault.
No. It involved coordinating multiple branches. Infantry, mechanized units like tanks, and the EPLF's own relatively new naval capability.
Coordinating all that ground troops, armor, sea units especially for Liberation Front, not a formal state military back then. That must have required some serious planning and communication.
Sophisticated level of planning, training, communication, absolutely. And the source also notes the huge area covered by the operation, 1,560 square kilometers.
Wow. That scale, combined with the amphibious element, it really underlines the complexity, the ambition of the whole plan.
That combination, the scale, the complexity, the successful multi-branch coordination, it really points to a remarkable level of military skill by the EPLF command, according to Weldemichael.
And here's where it gets, well, really interesting, and something Simon Weldemichael particularly emphasizes.
The element of surprise.
Exactly. The coordination, the speed, the sheer audacity of the Fenkil Operation took the Ethiopian army by surprise.
Which just raises this fascinating question, doesn't it, for us and for you listening. How could such a large, established army, supposedly the biggest in Africa, equipped with all these resources, how could they be caught so completely off guard?
Especially in a battle for one of their most vital strategic assets.
Right. Weldemichael's account implies it wasn't just a straightforward assault. It suggests, well, maybe superior EPLF intelligence, better operational security, maybe some clever deception tactics.
Or maybe, on the Ethiopian side, significant overconfidence. Underestimation.
Or, most likely, some critical combination of all those factors. It's hard to know for sure just from this, but the surprise itself is key.
The article also places Fenkil in context,
Yeah.
comparing it to earlier EPLF successes.
Yes, it describes Fenkil as the greatest strategic military operation carried out by the EPLF after the Battle of Athabet.
That smashed Ethiopia's strongest Nadu command.
So Fenkil wasn't just a one-off fluke.
No, Weldemichael presents it as more of a culmination, a demonstration of increasing military capability and strategic planning by the EPLF. He includes some powerful quotes from EPLF commanders too, doesn't he?
Yes, General Philippos Wolde-Yohannes describing the battle as tightening the noose on the throat of the enemy.
A grim image, but very powerful. Strangulation, cutting off supplies.
And another one from Major General Ramadan Aliye comparing the Derg's fate after losing Massawa to a tree without roots. Again, that sense of having their foundation, their support, completely cut off.
So, with Massawa captured, the EPLF, as the article explains, effectively severed that main sea supply line for the Ethiopian forces left in Eritrea, especially those in Asmara.
Which, according to Weldemichael's analysis, profoundly shook the Derg regime's foundation and significantly hastened the final defeat of the Ethiopian army in Eritrea.
Okay, let's move beyond the battlefield itself now. Simon Weldemichael's article also explores how this, well, stunning victory was perceived, how people reacted.
Right, and he draws directly on reactions documented in the source material.
He says the liberation of Massawa wasn't widely expected.
No, he states it came as a surprise to both friends and foes in the world.
That's telling. It suggests even those sympathetic to the Eritrean cause might not have seen a victory of this scale coming. Right then, right there.
Exactly. It wasn't necessarily predicted, even by supporters.
And there's evidence of immediate global recognition of just how significant this was. He cites a BBC broadcast.
Yes, from February 10th, 1990, the very day the battle ended. The BBC apparently stated, and Weldemichael quotes them directly, "If the victory claimed by the EPLF is true, it's a big blow to President Mengistu."
So not just a local skirmish. The implications for Mengistu, for the whole war effort, were immediately grasped internationally.
Instantly recognized as a major event. But maybe some of the most compelling reactions, the most insightful ones cited in the source, actually come from the other side.
The captured Ethiopian officers.
Exactly. Their testimonies, as Weldemichael shares them, offer these really powerful admissions, not just of military defeat, but also recognizing the EPLF's capabilities.
The quotes he includes are pretty extraordinary. There's one from Brigadier General Tilahun Kifel, commander of the 606th Corps, captured there.
Yes. He's reported as saying, and this is directly from the source Weldemichael uses, "I have seen many battles. At this front, I have received my first defeat in my career as a military leader."
His first defeat, after seeing many battles.
And then he says, "I've lost my fighting spirit at this battle. The speed and morale of your fighters, the EPLA, surpassed that of ours."
Wow. That admission from a senior military leader, it's incredibly telling, isn't it?
Absolutely. To say he lost his fighting spirit and attribute it directly to the superior speed and morale of his opponents, that reveals the profound psychological impact, the morale-breaking effect Fenkil had on the Ethiopian leadership, at least according to this account.
Not just tactical, but spiritual, as you said earlier.
With spiritual loss, yeah.
There's another captured officer quoted, Brigadier General Ali Hash Abdu, commander of a mechanized unit.
Right, the third mechanized unit, so likely involved with the tanks. Weldemichael reports this general acknowledged the talent of the EPLF commanders.
Okay, acknowledging leadership skill.
And the superior mobility and speed of the fighters, and their skillful use of artillery.
So that's specific validation from the adversary, acknowledging their commander's talent, their force's speed, their technical skill with artillery.
Exactly. These aren't just grudging comments. They're direct acknowledgments of superior performance in key areas from someone who just faced it firsthand.
And what about the view from the very top, from Mengistu Hailemariam himself, head of the Derg regime?
Simon Weldemichael's article includes his reaction, too. Weldemichael states that Mengistu understood the war had entered a critical stage right after Fenkil.
And his description of the event, as quoted in the source, pretty grim.
Very grim and very revealing of how important Massawa was to him. He apparently said, "The occupation of Massawa means the occupation of the secular revolutionary command that we consider as the backbone of our defense forces."
The backbone of their defense forces.
That phrasing from Mengistu just reinforces exactly why Massawa was such a crucial target for the EPLF and why losing it was so devastating for the Ethiopian army. It wasn't just any city or port.
It was fundamental, a pillar supporting their whole structure in Eritrea. Losing it was, well, crippling, in his own words.
According to him, yes.
Okay, shifting gears slightly now from the military scene and how it was seen, Simon Weldemichael's article goes on to detail the significant political consequences that flowed directly from Fenkil.
Right. So first, the immediate military consequence. The victory at Massawa, as the article states, put the Ethiopian colonial army in Eritrea in complete encirclement.
Completely surrounded. Because Massawa was cut off from the sea, key land routes were controlled by the EPLF, so the big Ethiopian garrisons left, like in Asmara.
They were isolated, suddenly heavily reliant on air transport for everything, a very precarious situation for a large army.
So how did the Derg, Mengistu's government, react to this huge military humiliation, this encirclement?
According to Simon Weldemichael's account, their response was, well, tragically brutal, and maybe predictable for a regime feeling immense pressure.
What did they do?
They responded by bombing the civilian population of Massawa using cluster and napalm bombs.
Bombing civilians after losing the military battle with cluster and napalm.
Yes, this frantic, desperate act of attacking civilians. There's apparently a local term for it. Cubit-set.
Cubit-set.
Weldemichael uses this term, and it translates roughly to desperation or maybe lashing out in desperation.
So it speaks to a regime that had lost militarily and then just resorted to terrorizing civilians as retribution, maybe? Or some kind of futile attempt at control.
That seems to be the implication in the article. A lashing out born from powerlessness on the actual battlefield.
The source describes the bombing of the port, the city, as particularly brutal and destructive. Merciless attacks by the Ethiopian Air Force on civilians and the infrastructure.
It really raises that important question, looking at conflicts. How does desperation facing overwhelming defeat affect the actions of those in power?
Weldemichael, including this detail, and that term Cubit-set, it suggests it can lead to just increased brutality against the most vulnerable.
Precisely. When the conventional military options collapse, cornered regimes might turn to terror, inflicting pain, punishing people, maybe just causing chaos out of spite. Kiwatset seems to capture that specific kind of desperate, brutal reaction perfectly.
But beyond that horrific brutality, Simon Weldemichael's article points to something else. An unprecedented political admission that came after Fenkil.
Yes, something that hadn't happened before. He states it unequivocally. For the first time in its history, the Derg admitted its defeat.
That is highly significant, isn't it? Regimes fighting these long existential wars, they rarely, if ever, publicly admit defeat while they're still technically in power.
Very rare. So the military reality created by Fenkil, according to Weldemichael, forced a level of acknowledgement from the Derg that was just unthinkable before.
And the article provides some powerful evidence for this admission, directly from Mengistu again.
Yes, Weldemichael quotes a message Mengistu apparently sent to his military units just a week after Massawa was liberated.
What did it say?
In this message, the Ethiopian leader told his commanders that with Massawa's capture, the spinal column of the Ethiopian army had been broken,
The spinal column broken.
making the independence of Eritrea a reality.
Wow. That statement, coming from the head of the regime that fought for 30 years to prevent Eritrean independence, that's stunning.
It really is. It's almost a complete concession. He's basically telling his own forces it's over strategically. Independence isn't if anymore, it's when, or maybe even now.
Weldemichael uses that quote to really underline just how decisive Fenkil was, right up to the highest level of the Ethiopian government.
Exactly. The political upheaval triggered by Fenkil didn't stop there either. According to the source, the ruling party, the Ethiopian Workers' Party Central Committee, they convened.
And passed what the article calls farcical resolutions.
Yes, dismissively referred to as farcical. They suddenly promised economic reforms. They even changed the party's name to the Ethiopian Democratic Unity Party.
Huh. So these actions, Weldemichael frames them as just a direct reaction to the defeat at Massawa.
That's how he presents it, as these sort of desperate cosmetic attempts to change the narrative, maybe project an image of reform when facing undeniable military failure.
Changing the party name, promising reforms right after a catastrophic loss. It does sound like political maneuvering driven by crisis, trying to maybe calm things down internally or look better internationally.
It definitely has that feel, as described in the article, a bid to manage the fallout.
And the article includes another quote from Mengistu, a public one this time.
Yes, where he used a different but equally potent metaphor, saying they had been strangled by the throat.
Strangled by the throat. Weldemichael notes this echoes the EPLF commander's description earlier, tightening the noose on the throat.
Right. It shows how widely that feeling, that sense of being strategically cut off, choked, incapacitated, was felt within the Ethiopian hierarchy, from commanders on the ground right up to the president himself.
So you see this clear chain reaction. The military defeat, the brutal bombing, the unprecedented admission of defeat from Mengistu, the desperate political shuffling.
All of it, as Simon Weldemichael argues in his article, connects directly back to that military event at Massawa. Fenkil wasn't just a battle one.
It's a shockwave.
A military shockwave that triggered a political crisis and forced strategic concessions that had never happened before in this long conflict.
Okay, so let's finally look at the legacy, the place of the Fenkil Operation in the conclusion of this whole struggle, as Simon Weldemichael analyzes it.
Well, the ultimate goal of the Eritrean armed struggle, as the source makes very clear, was simple: establishing an independent Eritrea.
For which, as Weldemichael notes, Eritreans fought for 30 long years. A huge investment of time and lives.
30 years. And the article explains very clearly why Fenkil Operation is, in his words, revered as a great success within that narrative.
It's not just the military win itself.
No, it's specifically because of its decisive contribution to the realization of the political objective of Eritreans.
So the victory wasn't isolated. It had clear, lasting, strategic consequences that directly pushed the independence goal forward.
Exactly. And Weldemichael connects Fenkil directly with what happened next. Subsequent successful, coordinated military attacks by the EPLF.
And these weren't just in Eritrea.
No, according to the article, they continued within Eritrea, but also extended into Ethiopia itself. These combined, sustained actions, building on that strategic advantage gained at Massawa.
They exerted maximum pressure, as the article puts it.
Maximum pressure, yes, on the increasingly isolated, demoralized Derg regime.
And this immense sustained pressure, which strategically originated with the isolation caused by Fenkil. This ultimately led to Mengistu fleeing the country.
Yes, Mengistu fled to Zimbabwe in May 1991, which effectively marked the final collapse of his government.
Paving the way for the formal end of the war and Eritrean independence shortly after.
So, Fenkil wasn't the absolute final battle, but Weldemichael positions it as setting the stage, making that final act inevitable, perhaps.
The article wraps up this section with a really powerful sentiment about the fighters involved.
It does. Fenkil Operation is described by Weldemichael as a vivid demonstration of the unparalleled determination and military prowess of Eritrean freedom fighters who deserve to be remembered eternally.
Unparalleled determination and military prowess.
His analysis suggests that the sheer scale of the planning, the coordination across branches, the speed, the surprise element, and just the effectiveness against a much larger, supposedly better equipped army, it all demonstrated a level of capability that was indeed unparalleled in that specific context.
So let's try and wrap up this deep dive into Simon Weldemichael's article, Fenkil Operation Game Changer in the Independence Struggle. We've seen through his account how this three-day battle for Massawa was way more than just a tactical win.
Right. It was strategically brilliant, devastatingly effective militarily. It fundamentally altered the balance of power on the ground in Eritrea.
And it triggered this whole cascade of consequences, significant political concessions, major upheaval within the Ethiopian regime, including that unprecedented admission of defeat.
And according to Weldemichael's analysis, it was just a decisive, irreversible step. It exerted that maximum pressure, which directly contributed to achieving Eritrean independence after those 30 long years.
Simon Weldemichael's article really does make the case effectively that this single operation truly acted as the game changer, its title claims.
Yeah, it illustrates so well how concentrated force, strategic vision, tactical innovation, how they can have these huge cascading military and political effects that resonate way beyond the battlefield, really altering the course of history.
It's a remarkable account of a really pivotal moment. And it leaves us, and you, the listener, with maybe a final provocative thought to consider, drawing from this powerful material. Given the dramatic scale of the defeat, Weldemichael describes those raw statistics of loss, the candid admissions from Ethiopian officers about losing their fighting spirit, Mengistu saying the spinal column was broken. How might the memory, the narrative, of a single battle like Fenkil continue to shape identity? Resilience. Self-perception for everyone involved, both victors and vanquished, for generations.
That's a deep question. And also, what does that local term set desperation? What does it tell us about the human element in conflict, especially when power is slipping away? What kinds of profound, maybe terrible actions can desperation trigger?
Powerful questions indeed, all raised by Simon Weldemichael's very insightful article. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive today.
We hope you found it as illuminating and thought-provoking as we did exploring it.